The news coming out of the royal sphere today paints a vivid and incredibly tense picture of where things currently stand with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex following their latest venture across the pond. It appears that the dust has far from settled after their recent family trip to the United Kingdom, and the emotional fallout is only just beginning to make its way into the public eye. For a while now, royal watchers and commentators have been closely observing every subtle move, every shared glance, and every carefully worded statement emanating from both Montecito and Buckingham Palace, constantly searching for signs of a genuine thaw in relations. Yet, based on the latest insider revelations, it seems any hope for a smooth, harmonious reconciliation has hit a massive roadblock, primarily centered around Meghan Markle's profound dissatisfaction with how she and her family were received. According to highly placed sources speaking out in the aftermath of the visit, the Duchess of Sussex has made it abundantly clear that she is in absolutely no mood to keep groveling. Those exact words carry an immense amount of weight and suggest a deep well of frustration that has likely been bubbling under the surface for quite some time. To truly understand the gravity of this situation, we have to look back at the mechanics of this recent trip and the immense expectations that were placed upon it by both the public and, seemingly, by Prince Harry himself. Last month, Meghan, who recently turned 44, made the significant decision to travel back to Britain. This was not a solo endeavor, but a full family journey, as she brought their two young children along with her to reunite with her husband. Harry had already arrived in the United Kingdom several days prior, setting the stage and perhaps testing the waters before his wife and children touched down on British soil. The logistics of this trip alone speak volumes about the cautious approach the Sussexes are taking when it comes to their interactions with the royal family and the British public. Harry going ahead of his family could be interpreted as a protective measure, or perhaps a strategic attempt to lay some preliminary groundwork with his father, King Charles, before the highly anticipated family reunion took place. When Meghan and the children finally did arrive, the overarching narrative pushed by optimistic observers was one of potential healing. The entire Sussex family coming together in the UK presented a rare, tangible opportunity for bridge building. The pinnacle of this visit was inevitably the much-discussed meeting between the Sussex family, King Charles, and Queen Camilla. Meetings of this nature is never just casual family get-togethers. They are steeped in history, intense protocol, and an undeniable layer of tension, given everything that has transpired over the past few years. From the explosive television interviews to the deeply personal memoirs and the ongoing legal battles regarding security, every interaction between Harry, Meghan, and the senior royals is fraught with complicated emotional baggage. We know that this high-stakes meeting took place, but what is becoming increasingly clear is the stark contrast in how this meeting, and the trip as a whole, were perceived by Harry versus how they were experienced by Meghan. The word disappointing has been used by insiders to describe the overall atmosphere, and that is an incredibly telling description. It implies that certain expectations were not met, that olive branches may have been offered but perhaps not received in the spirit they were intended, or conversely, that the reception the Sussexes received was decidedly frosty. For Meghan, the feeling of being marginalized seems to have been the defining characteristic of her time in the United Kingdom. Sources have stated explicitly that she feels she was treated so badly during this visit. This is a powerful assertion, and one that instantly reignites the ongoing debate about how the royal institution handles those who have stepped away from the inner circle. To be made to feel like an outsider within your husband's family, especially when you have brought your children across the world to facilitate a connection with their grandfather, is a deeply personal and painful grievance. Meghan's reported relief at finally being back home in California is palpable, even through the second-hand accounts provided by insiders. The sunny sanctuary of Montecito, far removed from the glaring lenses of the British tabloid press and the rigid formalities of royal life, clearly represents a safe haven where she feels she can breathe and be herself without constant judgment. The contrast between her life in California and her experiences in the UK could not be more stark, and this recent trip seems to have only solidified her preference for the former. It is entirely understandable that after making the effort to travel, to subject herself once again to an environment that has historically been incredibly challenging for her, only to feel dismissed, she would draw a firm line in the sand. The refusal to continue groveling speaks to a reclamation of power and a steadfast commitment to her own self-worth, setting the stage for a profound ideological clash with her husband on how they should proceed. This ideological clash is exactly where the narrative becomes incredibly complicated for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex as a united front. While Meghan has seemingly reached her absolute emotional limit, Prince Harry is operating from a vastly different perspective, one heavily influenced by his lifelong ties to the institution. The insider accounts make it explicitly clear that Harry is desperate to keep the momentum going. He is looking at this recent, albeit fraught, family visit not as a securely closed door, but as a tiny crack in the window that he urgently needs to pry open. For him, the simple fact that they were all in the same room, that his children were breathing the same air as their grandfather, the king, is a massive victory in itself. Harry is caught in this agonizing middle ground. He completely understands Meghan's frustrations, and according to the sources close to the couple, he does not invalidate her feelings about the trip being deeply disappointing on a multitude of levels. He sees the coldness, he feels the awkwardness, and he knows exactly why his wife is hurting. Yet, his solution to this pain is diametrically opposed to hers. While Meghan wants to retreat to the safety of California and refuse to offer any more olive branches, Harry feels the best course of action is to simply put, it's all behind them. He wants to swallow the pride, ignore the slights, and force a focus on the positives, no matter how few and far between those positives might actually be. Harry is reportedly telling his inner circle, and presumably his wife, that this precise moment of extreme discomfort is the exact time they should be making a real effort. In his mind, pushing through the awkwardness and enduring the cold shoulder is the absolute only way they are ever going to rebuild trust with the royal institution. But this raises a monumental question regarding this entire dynamic. Trust from whom and for whom? Is Harry trying to prove to King Charles and the rest of the monarchy that he and Meghan are trustworthy enough to be let back into the emotional fold? Or is he desperately trying to find a reason to trust the family that he feels ultimately abandoned him? The phrase rebuilding trust is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting here. It implies that the foundation is entirely shattered, which the entire world knows it is, but it also places a massive burden of labor squarely on the shoulders of the Sussexes to do all the fixing. Harry's willingness to take on that heavy emotional labor, even when he and his wife are openly being treated poorly, is a testament to how deeply tethered he still is to his roots. It is a fundamental truth that no matter how much physical distance he puts between himself and London, and no matter how many explosive interviews are released, he is still a prince of the blood, and he still craves the acceptance of his father. Let us really examine that specific phrase used by the insider, detailing how Meghan felt they were treated like a pair of outsiders. This is perhaps the most stinging indictment of the entire visit. When you strip away the titles, the crowns, and the royal standard, this is ultimately a family. To travel thousands of miles with your toddlers, extending what is undeniably a massive olive branch, only to be met with an atmosphere so chilly that you feel like a complete stranger in your husband's childhood home, is a profoundly isolating experience. Being treated as an outsider is not just about where you are seated at a dining table or the stiff formality of a greeting. It is about the unspoken, heavy energy in the room. It is the guarded conversations, the polite but distant smiles, and the constant, suffocating feeling that you are being managed as a public relations issue rather than welcomed as family members. The insider explicitly noted that the trip was disappointing on a lot of levels. We can safely assume these levels encompass not just the strained personal family dynamics with Charles and Camilla, but likely the logistical nightmares, the ongoing security anxieties, and the overall lack of genuine warmth that one would naturally hope for during a long overdue family reunion. For Meghan, returning to that specific environment is a stark, unavoidable reminder of exactly why they packed up and left in the first place. She is looking at this situation entirely through the lens of self-preservation and protecting her peace. Why should she continue to put herself, and more importantly her young children, in a position where their mere presence is treated as a burden or a diplomatic minefield? When she says she is in no mood to keep groveling, it is a definitive, uncompromising statement of her boundaries. Groveling inherently implies a power imbalance, a begging for scraps of basic affection or approval from an institution that has, in her eyes, repeatedly failed to protect or support her. Meghan is choosing her peace of mind and her own self-respect, but Harry's unrelenting desire to push forward creates a fascinating and potentially troubling dynamic within their marriage. He is essentially asking her to endure the very environment she fled for the sake of a long-term goal of reconciliation that may not even be realistically attainable. He is asking her to ignore the blatant reality of their outsider status and pretend that if they just try hard enough, if they just show up enough times with smiles on their faces, the institution will magically transform into the warm, embracing family he so desperately wants it to be. This inherent conflict in how to approach the royal family places the Duke and Duchess of Sussex at a very significant crossroads. If Meghan is resolutely closing the door on making any further efforts to appease an institution that makes her feel like an outsider, and Harry is equally determined to keep pushing for a reconciliation to rebuild shattered trust, something eventually has to give. We are potentially looking at a future where Prince Harry undertakes these emotionally taxing transatlantic journeys completely on his own. If Meghan holds true to her stance that she is in no mood to keep groveling, it is highly unlikely we will see her rushing back to London anytime soon, even for significant royal milestones. This would mean that future meetings with King Charles and Queen Camilla might only feature Harry, fundamentally shifting the entire dynamic of these interactions. The atmosphere cultivated during this Prince of Harry, a recent visit, actively prevents any natural familial bond from flourishing. If the king is truly interested in a unified family, the strategy of treating the Sussexes like outsiders is counterproductive, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of endless distance and deep-seated resentment. Without his wife and children by his side on future visits, Harry's attempts to bridge the gap could either become more streamlined, free from the intense media scrutiny that always surrounds Meghan, or they could become even more glaringly isolated, highlighting the permanent fracture within the family structure. For Meghan, being back in California is not just a geographical shift, it is a profound reclamation of her personal autonomy. The insider's emphasis on her profound relief speaks volumes about the immense psychological toll these United Kingdom visits take on her. In Montecito, she dictates the terms of her own life. She is building her brand and raising her children in an environment where they are celebrated, not scrutinized as potential liabilities for the crown. When she reflects on the recent trip and concludes that she was treated so badly, She is essentially validating her original, life-altering decision to step back from royal duties years ago. Every cold shoulder and stiff interaction during this visit serves as a retroactive justification for their exit. Why sacrifice the peace she has painstakingly built to repeatedly bang her head against a brick wall in London? She recognizes that the institution is highly unlikely to change its fundamental nature, and she is simply no longer willing to bend herself out of shape to fit into a mold that never accommodated her. Harry, on the other hand, is still tightly holding on to the hope that the mold can be broken, or at least slightly reshaped. His insistence on focusing on the positives, despite the glaring negatives, showcases a son who desperately misses his family and is willing to absorb a tremendous amount of emotional discomfort to salvage whatever fragments of a relationship are left standing. But one has to wonder exactly how long he can sustain this forward momentum if he is the only one paddling the boat. If the royal family continues to keep them at arm's length, and his own wife refuses to engage in what she views as a humiliating cycle of groveling, Harry's mission to rebuild trust might ultimately become a solitary, exhausting crusade. Trust is absolutely a two-way street. It cannot be magically rebuilt solely through the sheer willpower of one man caught squarely between loyalty to his birth family and fierce devotion to his wife. The monarchy must also be willing to meet him halfway, to offer genuine warmth, and to actively dismantle the outsider status that made Meghan feel so utterly alienated last month. Until that happens, these high-stakes trips will likely continue to end in bitter disappointment. The overarching narrative is not one of healing, but of hardened boundaries. Meghan is planting her flag firmly in California soil, prioritizing her mental well-being and refusing to chase the approval of an establishment that has consistently left her feeling marginalized. Meanwhile, Harry remains caught in the emotional crossfire, desperately trying to weave together a fractured family tapestry that might just be beyond repair. The coming months will be absolutely critical in revealing how this delicate balancing act unfolds. Will Harry continue his solo efforts to thaw the ice, or will he eventually share Meghan's perspective and fully embrace their isolated independence? This is a rapidly developing situation that goes far beyond typical gossip. It is a profound human drama about family estrangement and the heavy price of personal freedom. I would love to know exactly where you stand on all of this. Do you think Meghan is entirely justified in her refusal to keep extending olive branches after feeling treated so poorly? Or do you believe Harry's strategy of pushing through the awkwardness to rebuild trust is the better approach for the long term? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you found this deep dive insightful, make sure to hit that like button to support the channel and subscribe so you never miss out on our ongoing coverage. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I will catch you in the next one.